What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video. And this week we're going to be going over a deck that when you think of the Modern format, I think people usually come up with at most like a handful of decks, what they remember when they bring up this format. And this deck is no different. It's a deck that has survived through all the changes of the format, from all the unfair things to the broken things that have existed in the format. The player base has just kept finding a way to innovate and make this deck better, and always just find a way just to make it good enough where people question if it's back, or what have you. So if you played the format, you obviously know what I'm talking about. So this week we're going to be looking at Jund for the Modern format. Let's go ahead and take a look. So here we have the Jund deck list piloted by Travis White at the Modern 5K at SCG Con Syracuse, which he piloted to a 5-0-1 finish. So congratulations to them on the finish. I'd imagine that's probably a pretty good payout for a 5K. Just going undefeated, especially with a deck like Jund, which I would say says a lot about the player more so than the actual deck itself. But before we get too deep into the ins and outs and the what haves and what nots of this Jund deck, I would like to say thank you very much to all the people that have subscribed to the channel, showing support any way that they can. Just that little bit helps out a lot and keeps me making videos. So with that being said, if you are not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so. Also ring the bell as well. It's kind of rhyme there. That way you know when I upload videos. I try to upload 3 to 4 videos a week, mixing between Modern and Pioneer, just because I love those formats very much. As I just found out today that this month is actually Pioneer for the Mana Traders event, so I might try to stream some games possibly, or just show off some matches and stuff going through that, trying to qualify for that event. So that'll be really cool. With that being said, let's get back into the deck. So this version of Jund, just kind of looking over the mana base, is missing a few things. As I said mana base, but through the deck itself. So the entire deck itself is kind of missing a few things that I think have been standard in Jund, really since Modern Horizons 2. There is no Urza Saga, there is no Dragon Rage Channeler, and there is no Unholy Heat. Now, obviously, the Delirium cards are not in here. There's 24 cards that would actually trigger like Dragon Rage Channeler, and not having cards like Mishra's Bauble and cheap things like that, or like Shadow Spear to like diversify your card types, while also not having like targets for like Urza Sagas, all makes sense. Totally get it. So what the heck are we playing instead of that? So it looks like kind of like Fury and Seasoned Pyromancer kind of take up some of the creature slots that the Dragon Rage Chandler would have taken. Seasoned Pyromancer being, a 3 mana 2/2 that lets you discard 2 cards when it enters and draw 2 cards. For each non-land card discarded this way, you create a 1/1 elemental creature token. Of note with Seasoned Pyromancer, and I don't know if it's necessarily like a I think it's pretty like common knowledge at this point, but like Seasoned Pyromancer when it enters the battlefield, if you have no cards in hand, you just get to draw 2 cards with this. So if you just draw this as like your top deck, you get to draw 2 cards. You don't get to make any 1/1s or don't have the potential to make 1/1s, but you just get 2 fresh cards when you were hellbent. So I'd say that's pretty good. Mana sink late, even if it just makes 2/1/1s, that can be a difference when you're kind of in top deck mode, and you brick for a turn, you draw a land, you are able to activate the Seasoned Pyromancer and at least put a little bit of pressure on the board. Fury, well-known Modern Horizons 2 card, enters the battlefield, deals 4 damage among any number of creatures or planeswalkers. Normally gets to like you 2 for 1, but like your 2 for 1's pretty good because it gets to kill things like Yawgmoth can take out some planeswalkers. Gives you an answer to a Ren and 6 on the draw when you essentially like don't play like a Ragavan or things like that, and it also gives you more open options to beating a turn 1 Ragavan. So that's pretty good. Fury definitely does his job here, and if you ever just get to cast it, a 5 mana 3/3 with double strike is very hard to beat in combat offensively and defensively as well. Um, but like the real all stars, like the real creatures of this deck, is kind of like some new school in Ragavan mixed with some old school in Tarmogoyf. Ragavan is basically like what the format's about. even though it doesn't seem like it, people are just playing a lot of four color. Ragavan is just a very polarizing card, and the fact that I think four color control is like one of the best decks in the format is because it has tons of answers to Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, just in like the creatures, Solitude and Fury, and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. But we're not talking about the dumb four color control deck. We're talking about Jund, modern staple Jund, and Ragavan just kind of gets to go off in a deck like this. The fact that Ragavan can act as like a mana dork by hitting your opponent, stealing a card, and making that a very important treasure, you can get down like Liliana's, or even still have the option to play Ren and Sixes and kind of build up your mana to then get to do other things with said mana, like hard cast Furies and cast like Seasoned Pyromancers even on like turn 2 to put additional bodies into play and put pressure on your opponent. Tarmogoyf, as old as the Jund deck is for the modern format, Tarmogoyf is a staple of the Jund decks. Like, this is basically why Tarmogoyf for the longest time was triple digits up until, its millionth reprinting. It's still, even on rate, like a very good creature. Like, I wish this card was printed in standard because it's just a really good creature. It scales, for the early and late game, and it just gets to be aggressive. It can be defensive. It just does like a lot of things for a creature not having like any necessarily activated abilities or anything fancy ETB, anything. It's still probably one of the best green 2 drops that you can play in modern, and I'm glad to see Tarmogoyf here. I really am. I really love this card. Not even for nostalgia purposes because I never really got to play with Tarmogoyf, but it's just always been a cool card. I love it. The Planeswalkers. Another old school mixed with new school in the Planeswalker slot. We have Liliana, of course, the old school, was at one point considered at least in the short list of best Planeswalkers of all time. Probably not so much anymore, considering that we've had some pretty broken Planeswalkers and still have some pretty broken Planeswalkers in the format. She still holds up by 2022 standards. Makes each player discard a card on the uptick, which you really don't necessarily care about if you get Ren and 6 going alongside Liliana the Veil. You can make your opponent sacrifice a creature, to which if your Fatal Push, a Lightning Bolt, Terminate, Kolaghan's Command, even Riveter's Charm cannot deal with it, Liliana most likely can, so that's pretty good. And finally, like, her ultimate ability makes you separate all the permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice, which is just a very powerful ultimate ability. Playing this like against control, there's definitely some piles where you could just make it like a lose-lose. It feels like kind of like a reverse Factor Fiction, except it is way more fun being the person making these piles than the Factor Fiction opponent making piles for you. Um, the new school, Ren and 6, we have probably one of the best, well, I mean, easily one of the best 2 drop Planeswalkers, because the other one's Tibalt. But Ren 6 is just been polarizing almost from the day it was printed. People were kind of low on it, like it only gets back a land, and then people were like, oh man, it gets back a land, and just lost their collective minds. Is an answer to Ragavan and any like the 1 power things, can get rid of like a Dragon Reach Channeler on turn 1 as well. That is definitely not nothing, considering that most of the aggressive decks in the format tend to avoid playing 1 toughness creatures for 1 mana because Ren and 6 can easily pick them off. That's kind of like why we see Bob or Dark Confidant for some of the newer players not played in like the Jund decks anymore, because you playing a Bob on turn 2 and then your opponent on their turn 2 playing a Ren and 6 and killing your Bob is so much tempo for them that it's literally just not worth playing a card that is just going to essentially draw you an extra card each turn. So Ren and 6, definitely one of the best planeswalkers and probably one of the best spells you are playing in like the Jund deck, and definitely a card that uh, is also high on the list of you probably want to be playing 4 of these. If you have 4 of them, obviously it's kind of an arm and a leg at like 210 just for 3 of them, whatever that math checks out to. So the spells, this is kind of where the Jund deck also kind of like really gets to spin its wheels and stuff, because while it does have some pretty big threats and some big significant threats in like Tarmogoyf and Ragavan, its Planeswalkers being efficient in Ren 6 and Liliana, the removal spells and the way that it gets to interact is kind of where the deck gets to pivot, from being the control deck to the aggro deck in aggressive matchups, from being like an aggressive deck to like picking its spots against like the control decks and things like that. You have cards like Fatal Push that kill a majority of like the creatures in the format for 1 mana. This is exactly where Jund wants to be in the efficiency department. You have Lightning Bolt, which can also give you a little bit of reach and does answer some other threats that you want in the format. Thoughtseize and Inquisition being, 6 between the two of them. Uh, Thoughtseize just being like the best one for one in Magic. Getting the information of seeing your opponent's hand, choosing their best card, and at the cost of losing 2 life is really no big deal. And Inquisition giving you the same information but getting to take a card that's 3 or less. Not as good as Thoughtseize, obviously, with the restriction of the card having to be 3 or less, but it's still very, very good and, still sees play to this day, all the way from the OG Zendikar block. Rounding out the spells, you have one Terminate, just straight up destroy target creature, can't be regenerated. Always awesome. Kolaghan's Command gives you a little bit of grind, being able to pick up your own creatures, getting to deal 2 damage to any target, getting rid of like the smaller creatures, maybe picking off a Planeswalker or just finishing off your opponent. And just a nice shatter and discard effect too can give you a little bit of tempo when your opponent and you are in top deck wars and you're able to pick up like a Tarmogoyf and make them discard their card with their draw step to leave them empty handed and essentially force their next card to be hopefully worse than their previous card that you made them discard. Finally, the newest edition, and I have no idea what this card even does. Riveteer's Charm from New Capenna. Uh, an opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker they control with the highest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Gives you some impulse draw by exiling the top 3 cards of your library, and then you may play those cards until your next end step. Or some graveyard hate, you exile target player's graveyard. Obviously, each one of the modes going to a mode on Riveteer's Charm, or given the colors and everything. Definitely an interesting card. I know people said that they would like to play it. Obviously, I can't speak ill of the deck after it went 5-0-1. But this card, I don't know if I would play 4 copies of it. I'd probably pepper in like the fourth Ren and 6 before I play the fourth Riveteer's Charm. But obviously it worked out, so maybe I'm just missing something, or maybe I'm just old fashioned. You can tell me in the comments. So that's the spells, the meat and potatoes of the deck. The mana base is usually pretty simple, but it is actually getting to play some sweet cards because of the newer sets. Back when, instead of Den of the Bugbear, there was Raging Ravine, which essentially did sort of kind of the same thing, except Raging Ravine itself got bigger. Den of the Bugbear just makes other tokens, which can be pretty good, just by going wide and stuff rather than just making a giant creature on its own. In conjunction with Ren and 6, cards like Nurturing Peatland get better because you can have to sacrifice a draw card and then pick it up with Ren and possibly even play it again as like your land and try to cash in on another card. Takanuma, the Abandoned Mire, lets you just mill cards and return a creature or planeswalker back from your graveyard to your hand. Uh, there's no, aside from like Ragavan, there's no other legendary creatures. So this is always going to cost at the minimum 3 mana. But, still very good, especially when you are continuing to hit your own land drops and you're able to use your Ren and 6 to get back these utility lands. Zaitor's Proving Ground, you're probably more than likely fetching this up as like your land like on turn 1 if you don't have a turn 1 play, but also the fact that you can just cycle this card for 3 mana and then pick it up back up with Ren as like a more expensive way to draw cards, but nonetheless still getting to draw cards and have a way to kind of cash in the card that Ren 6 picks up. Finally, you have Boseiju, which has become essentially a staple of like any green-based deck in the format. Playing at least one of them, getting to blow up an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land, and then that player's searching library for a card with a basic land type. Um, Aside from that, like pretty straightforward. Playing Bloodstained Mires, Blood Crypts, Overgrown Tombs, and the like, just as fetchable lands. And obviously, the more fetch lands you're playing, the more likely you're able to actually pick up lands with Ren and 6 and to thin out your deck even further. And the sideboard is actually pretty interesting. Crime and Punishment is a card that the Yawgmoth decks have been playing, so why can't Jund play it? For Leyline of the Void for those pesky graveyard-based decks, Magus of the Moon to hose Tron and other bad matchups that have tons of great mana, and hopefully hosing the 4-color control deck, but probably not because they always have their dumb freaking thing that makes their lands tap for any color. Engineer Explosives, pretty good against the Rhinos matchup as well as any other like tokeny like go wide deck, which is really just rhinos with extra steps. One Force of Vigor, which I find odd because I think you'd want at least 2 or 3 of these cards, but is what it is. Again, can't really talk when the person went undefeated with the deck. And I think the most interesting of all the cards is 4 Phyrexian Crusader, which has first strike, protection from red and white, and has infect. Uh, Really interesting card. I mean, there's no way to really like pump it up and get a quick infect kill on your opponent, but the fact that it does have protection from red and white does give it a lot of protection like against like the 4-color control deck, and just does give you a way to kind of beat through in the game after they've get to gain like a ton of life from doing dumb stupid things because they're a dumb stupid deck. And that's Jund for the modern format. A deck that isn't necessarily near and dear to my heart because when I was playing ad nauseum, Jund was one of the most popular decks, and you could say that that is a me problem, but I say that is a Jund player's problem because their willingness to stop me from having fun will not stop me from having fun until it stopped me from having fun. So, yeah, that's the deck. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, comment down below about your hate for Jund. I don't want to hear anything good about Jund. So if you want to make me angry, go ahead and do that. If not, go ahead and trash Jund in the comments of the video. I don't care. Um, and yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope to see you all in the next video. And remember, I hope that you win every die roll. I hope you get to keep good sevens and that you never miss lethal. See ya.